In the 12 months ending May 2025, the Bureau of Labor Statistics recorded the disappearance of 130,180 customer service representative jobs. No plant closures, no offshoring announcements. The positions simply ceased to exist, absorbed into automated chat systems and AI-managed voice platforms running on corporate servers. This is not a forecast. It is a documented accounting of displacement already underway, and of the specific verifiable gap between the jobs economists spent a decade warning about and the jobs that are actually gone. For years, the dominant image of AI-driven job loss centered on a truck driver, hands off the wheel as an autonomous vehicle navigated an empty highway. That image organized policy proposals, congressional testimony, and billions in proposed retraining budgets. Labor economists built frameworks around it. Journalists repeated it. The image was wrong. The first wave of displacement moved through offices, not freight corridors. It hit workers with college degrees before it touched CDL holders. It erased roles involving writing, answering, organizing, and mediating between people and institutional systems. The workers in those roles had no union contracts with displacement provisions, no industry-wide retraining pipelines, no policy infrastructure calibrated to their situation. Many received no warning at all. The pattern of what actually happened, who lost work, why forecasters failed to anticipate it, and who faces the sharpest near-term exposure, follows a coherent logic once the evidence is laid out plainly. The workers who felt displacement earliest were not operating heavy machinery. They were sitting at desks, writing copy, answering customer calls, drafting documentation, and processing the information flows that keep organizations running. By 2024, freelance writers and content marketers were reporting that client work had dried up, not gradually, but abruptly. Reporting by The Guardian in 2026 documented direct accounts from workers describing the same experience. Clients openly citing AI as the replacement for human-produced copy, contracts not renewed, rates collapsing to the point where the work became economically unviable. The clients did not obscure the reason. AI was named explicitly. The speed of that contraction separated it from earlier displacement cycles. The offshoring of manufacturing through the 1990s and the computerization of clerical work across the 1980s each moved over years and decades, giving workers time to observe a direction of change before it became irreversible. The content writing contraction moved in months. Writers who had built specialist knowledge over years found the market for that knowledge had evaporated within a single calendar year. Customer service followed a measurable structural trajectory. The 4.8% single-year decline recorded by the Bureau of Labor Statistics through May 2025 was not a cyclical fluctuation. It was a category contracting under sustained pressure from AI tools that handle complaint resolution, account inquiries, and product support at a cost per interaction that no human workforce can match. Administrative roles compressed through a different mechanism. Scheduling, data entry, document processing, and appointment coordination, work requiring a human to manage the interface between a person and an organizational system, migrated to AI tools with no single displacement event that generated press coverage. Workers were not dramatically laid off. They were not replaced when they left. Headcounts fell through attrition. Job postings vanished. The jobs became statistically invisible before anyone thought to look for them. The dominant forecasting framework for automation risk rested on a distinction that appeared analytically sound and proved empirically misleading. Economists drew a line between routine manual tasks and non-routine cognitive ones, and predicted that the former face the highest displacement risk. That framework achieved its widest influence through a 2013 Oxford University study by researchers Carl Benedict Fry and Michael Osborne, which estimated that 47% of US jobs were at high risk of computerization. The methodology centered on identifying tasks with clearly defined inputs, outputs, and decision rules, assembly line work, data entry, transportation. The paper's influence shaped labor policy attention for the following decade, directing retraining proposals and federal spending toward manufacturing workers and truck drivers. The reasoning was defensible given what AI systems could do in 2013. At that point, machine learning had demonstrated capacity in narrow, constrained domains. The prospect of a system generating a coherent paragraph, managing a customer complaint, drafting a legal summary, or producing a usable marketing image on demand was not an engineering reality near enough to incorporate into near-term labor forecasts. Goldman Sachs recalibrated the analysis in 2023. Their report estimated that AI could automate approximately 300 million full-time jobs globally. The Goldman analysis placed the highest exposure on office and administrative work, legal professions, and business and financial operations, the white-collar categories that the Frey-Osborne framework had treated as relatively protected precisely because they involved non-routine cognitive activity. The error in the earlier models was a category error about difficulty. Routine manual tasks, loading a delivery truck, replacing a component on an assembly line, turned out to be technically harder to automate than non-routine cognitive tasks once large language models arrived. Building a robot that reliably unloads a truck full of irregularly shaped packages in unpredictable configurations remains an unsolved engineering problem. As of 2025, building a system that responds to a customer complaint, summarizes a contract, or generates a product description proved solvable between 2020 and 2023. The tasks economists flagged as automation-resistant because they required language and judgment were exactly the tasks that transformer-based AI proved capable of approximating at scale. Policy followed the wrong map. Workers who were actually exposed first, writers, administrators, legal support staff, existed almost entirely outside the institutional frameworks designed to manage displacement. In 2024, the Bureau of Labor Statistics published an analysis identifying 18 specific occupational categories facing elevated AI exposure. The list did not include truck drivers or welders. It included paralegals, graphic designers, technical writers, interpreters, translators, and broadcast announcers. Every occupation on that list involves the production or transformation of language, images, or structured information. A legal assistant takes a set of documents and produces a summary. A technical writer takes engineering specifications and produces user documentation. An interpreter takes speech in one language and produces speech in another. These are information processing roles with identifiable input-output patterns. Pattern recognition at scale is precisely what large language models are built to perform. The displacement concentrated at specific functional intersections, roles mediating between people and organizational systems, roles translating between technical content and general audiences, and roles producing standardized content at volume. Customer service sits at the first intersection. Content writing sits at the second. Paralegal work sits at the third. This concentration explains the absence of visible displacement events. A factory closure produces news coverage, a defined headcount, a specific date. The contraction across customer service, content work, and administrative functions produced none of that. It produced instead a sustained reduction in job posting volume, a rising ratio of AI-managed interactions to human-managed ones, and a geographically dispersed workforce losing income through mechanisms that the headline unemployment rate cannot capture. Freelancers losing contracts do not file for unemployment at rates comparable to laid-off employees. Gig workers whose platform income drops do not generate the payroll data labor economists use to track employment conditions. Administrative workers eliminated through attrition do not appear in layoff announcements. The signal existed in the data, in BLS occupational employment statistics, freelance platform revenue surveys, content marketing hiring report, but not in the indicators that policy and media treat as primary. The displacement also reversed the class pattern of previous automation waves. Prior cycles hit workers without 4-year degrees hardest. The AI displacement of 2023 to 2025 concentrated pressure on workers who had acquired expensive credentials specifically to enter the affected professions: journalism, marketing, legal support, technical communication. Workers who invested in those pathways did so partly on the assumption that language-based cognitive work was durable. That assumption failed faster than almost any analyst had anticipated. The workers carrying the highest near-term exposure share several characteristics. They work in roles producing or processing language and structured information. They are disproportionately employed as freelancers, contractors, or in small organizations with limited HR infrastructure. They have no access to severance protections, retraining benefits, or institutional advocacy designed for their situation. Freelancers represent the most acute case. An estimated 64 million people in the United States performed some form of freelance work in 2023, according to an Upwork and Freelancers Union survey. That population includes a substantial concentration of writers, designers, translators, and administrative contractors, precisely the workers whose income streams showed the earliest AI-driven contraction. Freelancers do not receive severance. They do not qualify for trade adjustment assistance, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, which requires large employers to provide 60 days notice before mass layoffs, does not cover them. When their income disappears, the mechanism is not a layoff. It is a failure of renewal. Contracts expire without discussion. Clients stop returning. Paralegals and legal support staff face a structurally identical exposure. Law firms began deploying AI contract review and document analysis tools at measurable scale between 2022 and 2024. Companies including Harvey and LexisNexis released AI-assisted legal research platforms that compress tasks previously assigned to junior associates and paralegal staff. Firms that have publicly described reducing document review headcounts in favor of AI-assisted workflows are not projecting a future condition. They are describing decisions already made. Graphic designers face compounding pressure. The generation of basic visual content, marketing assets, social media images, standard illustration moved within reach of tools including Midjourney and Adobe Firefly at a speed that the professional design community could not absorb before market consequences arrived. Junior designers and freelance visual producers faced the sharpest initial pressure as clients found that AI tools could generate acceptable outputs at a fraction of previous costs. The threat across these categories is not always outright replacement. More often, it is compression. Tasks that previously required several hours of specialist time can now be completed with AI assistance in a fraction of that time, reducing total labor demand within an occupation without eliminating the occupation entirely. A worker whose billable hours fall by 60% faces a degraded market position without a clear displacement event to respond to. Income erodes, career paths narrow. The skill investment that justified entering the field continues losing value without the sharp discontinuity that would trigger institutional response. Two movements are running simultaneously through the displaced workforce, pointing in opposite directions. The first is a measurable shift towards skilled trades. Enrollment in electrician apprenticeships plumbing programs, and HVAC certification courses rose across the United States between 2022 and 2024, driven partly by a persistent skilled trades shortage documented across the construction and maintenance sectors since the early 2010s, and partly by a growing recognition among workers in AI-exposed professions that physical, on-site skilled labor resists automation in ways that desk-based cognitive work does not. The AI systems displacing content writers cannot currently wire a sub-panel or repair a commercial boiler. That physical irreplaceability carries direct labor market value. The second movement is demand created by AI itself. The systems displacing workers in content, legal support, and administration are not autonomous and are not error-free. They produce factual errors, they misread context, they fail in domain-specific ways, requiring correction by people who understand the domain deeply. A large language model summarizing a medical record can miss a clinically significant detail. An AI system processing a tax document can misapply a deduction category. An AI-generated legal brief can cite a case that does not exist. Correcting those errors requires professional expertise. Nurses, certified public accountants, licensed engineers, and practicing attorneys are in demand not despite AI proliferation, but because of it, because their domain knowledge is the correction mechanism that makes AI output usable in high-stakes contexts. Companies specializing in AI data quality, including Scale AI and Appen, were employing tens of thousands of contractor reviewers as of 2024, with premium compensation rates for reviewers holding verified credentials in medicine, law, and finance. The critical variable for displaced workers is whether either destination is reachable. For a 27-year-old content marketer who can finance an apprenticeship program and sustain 2 to 3 years of reduced income during training, the trade pivot is a real option. For a 54-year-old administrative coordinator managing dependents and a mortgage, the same calculation produces different constraints and fewer viable paths. Policy has not accelerated to match the displacement. The United States had no dedicated federal program for AI-displaced workers operating at the scale of trade adjustment assistance as of mid-2025. The European Union's AI Act, which entered into force in 2024, contains provisions regulating high-risk AI applications but establishes no displacement compensation or retraining mechanism. No major economy had built an institutional response to white-collar AI displacement commensurate with its documented scale. The Goldman Sachs estimate of 300 million globally affected full-time jobs, if accurate, would represent a labor market restructuring without a close historical parallel in speed. Prior technological disruptions, agricultural mechanization, industrial manufacturing redistributed labor across generations. The current shift is moving across years. History does show that new categories of work emerge from technological disruption. The unresolved question is whether the new categories emerge on a timeline that overlaps with the working lives of the people displaced in the transition, and whether those workers can access the new categories without institutional support that does not yet exist at the required scale. The 180 customer service jobs that disappeared in 12 months are a data point near the front of a pattern that has not reached its end. The 18 occupational categories on the Bureau of Labor Statistics exposure list are not at peak contraction. The compression dynamics visible in legal support, graphic design, and technical writing have not stabilized. The displacement arrived before the predictions that should have anticipated it. The pattern is now in the data, visible to anyone looking at the right numbers.